Because that's how I feel like I have like my son. Well, now I have two sons, and I have a third one, which is Nugget. And yeah, you nurture them and you raise them, and then you make mistakes in the process.
Yeah. Hi, we are Thea and Tony, the sisters behind the online magazine sisterMAG. In our podcast sisterMAG Radio, we interview inspiring personalities in Germany and around the world.
Happy Friday, dear sisterMAG Radio listeners. Yes, another podcast in English as we have our last guest from New York City. It's Ranjana Armstrong, founder and CEO of the startup Nugget, a new guide for family travel. But before we dive into our talk with Ranjana, I have Thea in the studio. How are you?
Hello, I'm actually really tired today. I had a really bad night's sleep.
Oh no, haven't you read our article about 7 easy ways to better sleep?
I know, I've actually read that, of course, because I also proofread it. And I know that I have to change some things like no phone before sleeping, and I have to change the temperature of my room, but I think our readers should just dive into the article themselves in our current issue of sisterMAG 38 and let us know what they think and what more ideas they have for a good night's sleep. Also comment on our last Instagram picture where we have a little giveaway with
lavender oil.
Yes, exactly, with lavender oil, a lovely product that you should definitely try.
And now let's start with my interview with Ranjana Armstrong, founder and CEO of Nugget. She's a German-turned-New Yorker and spent most of her working life at the publisher Random House, where she worked in different fields of corporate development, having a front seat as the digital revolution took place. She tells us how working with various content creators and entrepreneurs there sparked her interest in starting up a business herself. She talks us through the various iterations her idea of doing something in the travel industry went through, how her day-to-day as an entrepreneur and mom looks like, and how she's building Nugget from scratch. So nice to meet you and to talk to you today. I always ask as the first question who you are and what you do, because then our podcast listeners know exactly who to expect.
Of course. It's nice to meet you guys too. So my name is Ranjana Armstrong. I'm the founder of an early stage startup called Nugget. And it's a platform for parents to share travel itineraries.
Okay, and how long does it exist?
So I've been working on it for probably almost 2 years now. It launched last September, so it's still really, really early.
Yeah.
We had a number of prototypes before that where we did a lot of user testing, but what you currently see online is what launched in September.
Okay, and are you doing that alone, or do you already have, because I can imagine you won't, or do you have a team already?
I have a team, but it's a team of freelancers that are loosely strung together, and they are, I mean, our community is very global, and my team is also very global. So right now we have a social media manager who lives in Madrid. I have an editor who lives in Berlin, but he's actually American and just recently relocated from Shanghai with his family to Berlin. Then I have a couple of other copy editors and editorial people here in the US, and I'm currently in the process of looking for a UX person to help me with more of the user research. And then we have a dev team that that sits in India. So that's, depending on how much work we're doing, that's 2 to 3 people. And then we have another designer. We have 2 designers, one in the Midwest and one in the Philippines.
So it's truly global, but
it is truly global.
It kind of fits also for the topic of the platform, because it's like a worldwide project.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, these days with all the tools that you have, it's so easy to find people in different locations. And quite frankly, living in New York, it's really expensive to pay somebody who lives in New York. Yeah. And since I'm still funding everything myself, I just can't afford paying somebody, you know.
The New York
salary hourly rate is just really hard.
Yeah, we can imagine. I mean, just having coffee here is double the price than probably the normal.
It's every time I go and my son and I, if we go to the park and I get a coffee, I always buy him a little treat, like a croissant or something.
Yeah.
And then I look at it and I was like, wow, this was just $4 for a donut, which would be like 60 cents in Germany.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Totally get it.
Yeah, so.
And can you tell our listeners a bit more what you did beforehand?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so before I started Nugget, I actually did something completely different. I worked at the largest trade book publisher here in the US, Penguin Random House, which is also in Germany. I mean, they're also the largest German-speaking publisher. And I was there for over a decade in various roles that involved business development. So a lot of work also in the digital space. So I had the last job that I had a team that was dealing primarily with app development and site development, and we did a lot of digital partnerships with other startups, trying to help our authors and our publishers get in front of the consumer in a digital way. So I did that for the last 4 years, and before that I had various other roles within Random House where I worked on ebooks, on some restructuring processes. I also tried, this was like the last project before I left, we had looked into implementing the lean startup method in the publishing process. Cool. So really taking that methodology and that thinking, how do you apply that to the publishing process? So that was one of the last projects I worked with, and it was super interesting and I learned a lot. But I think in a weird way, it also really set the bridge for me to leave.
That was my question, because it's a big step from such, I would say, corporate job, and with all the advantages and disadvantages, to starting own platform, own project with a widespread team and funding it yourself. So was it something in your old job that sparked the interest, or?
It was definitely something that I've always had in the back of my mind, just because I was always exposed to startups. The last 5 years, I worked with so many startups, and I guess the grass is always greener, right? I mean, you look at them and you're like, oh my God, you guys can make your own decisions. You don't have all that red tape, and you're really consumer-centric. You're not, adhering to all these different stakeholders, which in hindsight is completely silly, because a startup, you also have all these different stakeholders. Yeah. But that idea was always there, and I had a very good, I had somebody who I really respected who had also left and very successfully started a startup. And I remember him telling me, it's like, there are these golden handcuffs working in a corporate job in a company like Random House, because it's an amazing company to work for. You have amazing, super smart people that surround you. It's very creative. You have great benefits, decent salary. So there's nothing wrong with that job. Like, I liked the people I worked with. It was intellectually stimulating and it was challenging. So he was referring to that as the golden handcuffs, because you really, for you to leave, you're giving up difficult. A lot. And I think for me and he always said to me, he's like, just work on something on the side. Yeah. And I just could never find the time. And he actually did, and I'm still fascinated by the fact how he...
admiring. I don't know a lot of people who can do that.
But I think you make the decision, right? Like, that's then your life. Yeah. Like, you have your corporate job and you work on your startup, but then everything else. And I think at the time I was still, I was running a lot. I was training for marathons. I still had this urge to explore New York. So I was out and about and really taking advantage of the city. And then everything sort of changed when I had my son, because when I then returned from maternity leave, like, this urge to do something that was really meaningful became bigger and bigger. And not that my work wasn't meaningful, but I realized, like, I wanted to come home and, like, tell him, like, this is what mom does. Yeah. And I'm, like, super excited about it. And also have him see that I'm actually building something. Yeah.
Maybe it's comparable to building a child, kind of.
Yeah,
it's like a child.
Honestly, this is that's a great comparison, because that's how I feel. Like, I have, like, my son. Well, now I have 2 sons, and I have a third one, which is Nugget. And you nurture them and you raise them, and then you make mistakes in the process. Yeah. And actually, he inspired the name, because when I realized that I wanted to do my own thing, and I finally told my boss at the time, and he was
Are you crazy?
Well, it was hilarious because I told him that I'm not coming back when I was still on maternity leave, and the president of the company and my boss were both like, it's the hormones, you're not making sound decisions, think about it, take some more time. And so I got they gave me another 3 months off, I had 6 months maternity leave. For Americans, that's super long. So, and then they were very generous. They offered me to come back part-time. I could work from home if I wanted to. And I went back, but what I realized is like working part-time and from home in a company where that's not the norm.
Yeah, that's not working.
It doesn't work. You're so isolated. And I think that's when it started that I realized, if I did my own thing, I can set my own hours. I can figure out how I want to work. And so I did the corporate job for a few more months, and then I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to take some time figuring that out. And that's what I did. So I left.
Coming up with the idea for Nugget was not a direct road, but more of an exploration tour. Ranjana tells us how she took her time to prepare, how her personal love for photography and travel inspired her, that her early startup ideas weren't resonating with consumers, but that those conversations helped her to found Nugget.
2016 is when I gave myself a few months to figure out what I want to do. And I read a lot of books. I read, Tim Ferriss books. I read all the business books that I knew from my old job. And I realized that the things I was really passionate about was travel and photography and people. I really cared about people and stories. And so it was, for me, those were sort of the three anchors. How do I combine that? And I started talking to people in the travel industry, people who were photographers. I reached out to friends who I knew that were photographers and asked me if they could introduce me to other photographers, because I had this idea maybe I'll become a photographer. And then once I realized what it takes to work with clients, and I was like, no, this is not me. And then the travel side, it was interesting because everyone I spoke to was basically discouraging me from doing something in the travel space because it's such a hard space to enter. It's so competitive, it's highly saturated, and it's incredibly hard to make any money because the big players, own the market.
And it's very performance driven when you want to sell something.
Everyone wants to sell something, and the margins on that are so small. For you to actually make money on affiliate fees, it's almost impossible in any significant way. And I had this idea of building this place where I would aggregate people's travel stories because I felt that there was all this great writing out there, but nobody would find it because the way the algorithms worked. So unless you really optimize your keywords, and so everything that bubbles up are listicles, but the good writing that's out there, nobody finds. Yeah. And so I started doing research, but what I realized is I felt like I was the only person that cared about this. I spent a month or two interviewing people and doing user tests and really trying to understand, is there a pain point along those lines? And I think I was the only person who had this pain point. But I met somebody in the process who said to me, you need to look at the family travel space because that is a huge market, but it's so niche that a lot of people don't look at it. And I was like, no, I just had a child. I don't want to be that mom that starts a mom business. But
we're just talking about that.
Yeah, and it's because it's so true. Everyone, especially in New York, I feel like the moment somebody has a child, they're like, oh, you mean nursing clothes it's so hard to nurse while you have a child. We should develop a line of nursing clothes. Well, once you had your second child, you realize, it's such a small window in your life where that's actually a problem. You really don't need a business for that. But it's you have all these moments as a first-time mom where you feel like, oh my God, I discovered this thing that I need to solve. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some people actually do solve things that need to be solved. But I started talking to, whenever I met a parent, I would ask him, and I realized, wait, there is actually something there. Yeah. It's so hard to plan a trip as a parent because there's so many more variables you have to take into account. And the information is scattered across the web. You can't really, it takes, an average person, and a person planning a trip, I think Google did a study, visits 40 to 50 sites in the process of planning a trip. Oh. As a parent, that is even more because you have to figure out what are the activities that your child might want to do that are appropriate for the age. What is safe for the child? What destinations are safe? What is a good location where you want to stay? Like a good place to stay at? Is it safe for the children? Are there activities for them? How far is it to get to places you want to visit? So all of a sudden there are all these questions, and then also there's sometimes things that you don't know that you should know. So you don't look for it because you didn't know that it could be an issue until you get there and you realize, oh, if I had known that all the subways. I mean, it's obvious things like cobblestone streets. You wouldn't have brought a stroller if you had known that. But it might be little things like when we visited China with our son, that the showers, it's all wet bathrooms, and so the floor in the bathroom gets really slippery. Well, I only realized that when my son came sprinting into the bathroom, and smashed his head into the tile floor. So that's a great nugget of advice that you can be careful when you book these accommodations that can happen. But then it's also on the positive side, something like you go to the Eames House in LA if you really care about design. And this was actually a case study that I gave some editors when I was interviewing people, and they were like, well, you can't take children to the Eames House. Like that's not something you do with children. And I was like, well, actually they have toys that they put out on the lawn for the kids to play while you look at the house.
That's nice, yeah.
But you don't know that until...
They don't advertise it like
They don't advertise it because for them, families are not a target audience, so they don't think it's something worth mentioning anywhere. And so you can't find it. You don't know about it. And you might not go there. And so that's when I realized there is this aspect about getting this insights from parents that have visited places and figuring out a way how we can extract them and then present them in a way that they're discoverable for parents. And so that's what I then started to test, is what could that look like. And the more testing we did, we realized that there's this thing about itineraries that's really compelling, because if you know that there's this one big activity you want to do a day, and then there might be a great place to eat afterwards, or an ice cream place, and then a playground, all of a sudden you have a way to spend a day that will make the adults happy and the kids happy. And you don't have to stand there and trying to find a place that you want to eat at when everyone's sugar crashing and the kids are whining and you can't think anymore because you're hungry too. And then you run into the next place, and sometimes that turns out to be actually exactly perfect, but oftentimes you then end up at a place that's
substandard, and you wouldn't have gone, and it's not what you want to do.
Free time. And the thing with kids is almost they always want snacks and food, and so if there's a great ice cream place after you've visited this castle, then it's perfect. You can tell them okay, we're going to spend 2 hours at this castle. If you behave really nicely, we can go and get ice cream. Or even better, maybe there's something at the castle that the kid actually would enjoy. Like we had an itinerary from a family that visited a bunch of castles in the UK, and one castle had archery classes for kids. So now if you have older kids, you can tell them, hey, we're going to go to this castle, and you can learn how to use a bow. How awesome is that? So that's what we're really looking to compile. And so let me think. So last spring is when I started, recruiting contributors, interviewing them to see if they fit, the type of activities that I had in mind that would be interesting. And it was fascinating because I had started an Instagram handle. I didn't know where I was going with this, but I knew I want to find people who know how to photograph, who are passionate about traveling. So I just started sharing my own photos from my trips to China, and we started.
People found it.
And people found it and started following it, and then I was like, you know what? I should ask other people if I could share their photos from China. So I found this amazing mom who lives in Dubai and had traveled pretty much the same route that I had gone, but more extensively and with older kids. So I started sharing some of her photos, and so that's when I was like, I should just ask people if they wanted to. And so then one thing led to the other.
That was my question, how you find them. So it's a lot through Instagram.
Yeah, so now we find our contributors really primarily through Instagram. We now have I think 21,000 followers.
Yeah.
So it's still small. You know, it's like if
but
you look
they
at
are probably very targeted, and they
Yes,
exactly want to have what you offer,
and that's great
worth
because
more
we
than 100,000.
well, that's I mean, Instagram is such a fascinating platform because you do have those big influencers that have 100,000, a million followers. But if you then look at how many of those are actually engaged and how many of those are bots, and then the other thing that I find really interesting when you look at some accounts' growth rate, 1 month they had 10,000 and then the next month they had 80,000. So you're like, okay, that doesn't really happen. So,
and then
you know,
have a look.
it took us a while to get there, but for us it's a great way because at this point you sort of build a community around it. You recognize the people sharing their photos, the people commenting, and so that's how we recruit contributors.
And you still have this one hashtag.
Yeah, so the hashtag is Go with Nugget.
And so you could, if you do such a trip, then you could share your pictures and use the hashtag, and then you.
And that's exactly what parents are doing. So we have people that share their trips with the Go with Nugget hashtag, and so that's how we find them. And then we also just look, in general, we look around and see what are accounts, and again, what are accounts that you might not have heard about, because this goes back to the initial thing about stories. There's so many parents out there that take amazing trips with their kids that don't get paid by the hotel to stay at the hotel, that don't, like, we have this one family that, and I forgot how Andy found us, but her story's so amazing because she has 5 kids. She lives in the Midwest. 2 of her children have special needs, and she took her entire family to China.
Wow.
And they traveled through China, and they had the itineraries that she submitted. I actually forwarded one of them to my brother who lives in Beijing, who has no kids. But I was like, this looks incredible. You need to do this. Yeah. And so for me, people like that are really inspiring because they show, it's possible to travel with kids. It's possible to travel with kids if on a budget, and go to these places and have incredible experiences that you enjoy and the kids enjoy. Yeah.
And if I'm a parent and thinking of planning a holiday and I go up to your site, how does it work? Do you say, I would love to go to Asia, or this is my budget, or how should you go about when you have a look at your website?
That's a great question, and it's one of the things that's ever evolving. So right now, when you go on the site, you can browse the itineraries by destination, and you can filter them by age group.
Okay.
So, and all the itineraries are free. So this is something that a lot of people had asked me when I started, is like, are you going to sell the itinerary? I was like, no, I want to be a resource for parents. So you can either, if you know where you're going, you can enter the country or the city and then hit search and see what our community has submitted. Our long-term goal is obviously to expand that even further and allow you to filter by interest. So if you're a foodie parent and you're going to New York, what are itineraries where you might get, a great meal at an interesting restaurant, and then do an activity that your kids will enjoy. So that's like the long-term plan, but right now it's destinations that you can browse. And we have really, again, like when I started, I didn't know what areas I should focus on. Like some VC people that I spoke with said to me, you should follow the Facebook approach. You should own one market, own New York, and then go and own San Francisco, and then own London. And I was like, but families travel. I mean, the average family in the US takes 4.5 trips a year. And that can include like a week-long trip. That might be a long weekend. Yeah. So just focusing on one city didn't make any sense. Yeah. So I just like, look, okay, what are people submitting? Yeah. And next thing I know, we have itineraries for, a lot of states in the U.S., but then for places like China, Uzbekistan, Thailand, most of the European countries we're getting itineraries for. Where we really light still is South America, so that's something I would love to get more on. Yeah.
Are you actively then also searching for?
We are actively searching for people, but it's also a bandwidth issue because the thing we do with the itineraries, we actually review all of them. So it's not your self-publishing or like community-driven platform like a TripAdvisor where they might review it for, like legal issues or anything along those lines, but they don't really review the content.
Yeah.
And we read every itinerary. We fix grammar, we typos.
Yeah.
If something's unclear, we rewrite it.
Probably you even ask back if
We asked if there's something
or
doesn't make sense, or if we had one itinerary where I think the mom forgot that I don't know, there was something was like at the end, like it was a hike and then there was a restaurant, but it was unclear how you got from the hike to the restaurant. So we fixed those kind of things. So it takes a lot of time to. So that's why I'm right now, like I'm not like going out there and like send all your itineraries. So we're trying to. So that's right for this year is really to be more strategic about what destinations that we want to build out, because we also want to offer more for the destinations. So one project we're working on now is to really get more information on lodging, because we know it's such a pain point for parents to find the right place to stay that's within their budget. So we started to reach out to people to submit their favorite places that they've stayed at. And so now we're like, okay, so if you're going to Tokyo, we have itineraries for Tokyo, but we want to also provide you with insights on where to stay, so that that's easier.
Is a big point,
Lodging is a big point, and then the activities with the kids too. So we're hence the UX person that we're bringing on board, because we're going to do a lot more user testing and building out the site.
Do you also track what like the typical catchwords are that people search for?
Yes.
So that you know, okay, it's often.
So SEO is like the most important thing really these days.
It's one of hint what kind of you should focus on.
Yeah,
probably.
and it's a combination of what we do. I mean, we look obviously at keywords in Google and see what people are searching for, and that varies obviously by region. So since the site is in English, we spend most of our time, and we're in the US, we spend most of the time looking at American search patterns. But sometimes we also look at Australia or England, because if we have a European itinerary, it's equally interesting to somebody.
To them, definitely. Yeah.
And then we have a Facebook group that is also really helpful in identifying like what topics are particularly hot. And I'm part of a number of these Facebook groups for parents that travel, or for people who work in the travel industry or family travel industry. And what we're seeing right now is Portugal is really, really, really popular, which is no surprise, because I think it's popular for anyone, not just parents. But so we get a Portugal question almost every other week. Ireland is always really, really popular. Thailand and Japan. So those I feel like are the big ones that we keep seeing over and over right now. And so that's
where you can focus on that.
We can focus on that.
Immediate success kind of.
Because like I think that's one of the hardest thing if you're an early stage startup and you're a single founder with a bunch of freelancers. You have, and I'm a parent, right? So I have 2 little kids. I have only limited time in the day.
We were especially fascinated by Ranjana juggling both, being a mom and an entrepreneur. She explains us how this is only possible through great discipline, a strict timetable, and a great nanny.
I mean, this goes back to what I said earlier in my corporate job, when you think, freelance work is so great because you can work whenever and you have your own schedule. I think that's, if you have no children, maybe that's the case. But I think even then, I having now worked with a lot of digital nomads too, I don't think that's the case. Like, you actually have to be really organized and structured about your day, because otherwise you don't get anything done and you get really frustrated.
Yeah.
So, and it changed for me significantly once I added a baby to the mix. So, before that, I had a very structured day because my son was older, and we have an amazing nanny that takes care of him, who's a German kindergarten teacher. And he's going into kindergarten this summer. But once the baby came into the mix, the first few months, it's just
totally mixed up.
It was totally crazy. And that's when I realized, like, I think having your own company is so hard.
Yeah.
And it is like having a baby, because all of a sudden it's like, okay, there's things breaking, I need to fix it, or people need input to do things, but I don't have the time to do it.
They're waiting.
They're waiting, and
nothing
then
happens.
Nothing happens, and then you put pressure on yourself, and you get so frustrated, and then you start. I mean, I remember the first few nights I would sit there and I would nurse him in the middle of the night, and then I would check the Trello board to see what the team in India was messaging me, and I was like, oh, this is great, it's 2 a.m, I can get productive. But then by 8 a.m, I'm like,
you're dying.
Yeah, so
because you have to sleep somehow.
So after 2 months of that, I was like, okay, this doesn't work. So I did create a spreadsheet where I literally wrote down for every day what the hours are.
Okay.
Where, like, how much sleep do I need? I want to run at least twice a week.
Yeah.
I want to have time with my older son. I want to have time with, I obviously need to take care of the baby. And then you realize, well, there's a window from 10 to 12 in the morning, where the children are taken care of, I can get work done. And so I now have like time blocks in the morning and the afternoon where I know the kids are out of the house. And that's where I need to be really organized and focused, because otherwise, and that's the hard thing, because sometimes you just want 30 minutes of just reading the news, checking your social feed, chatting with a friend, and you start to feel so guilty because you're like, I have these 2 hours, I need to be productive. And I'm also paying for somebody to watch the kids, so I'm productive.
Yeah.
And so that to me has become actually really hard, and I didn't think about it. So I think that's, especially as a working parent, I think that's the hardest thing, is like, you have the pressure of not only your company being successful, but then you have the pressure of, my husband's paying for childcare so that I can do this. So there's almost like a triple charge to it. But I also, I read a lot of articles that talk about how female founders with children are actually the most productive because you have such a limited time. I can't work till 4 a.m. because I have to be in bed by 11 because the baby will wake up at 3 and I need to get at least some sleep. So yeah.
And do you have a plan how you would like to have it, maybe in 2 years? And so you have probably, if you have a spreadsheet for your day.
I'm like, if you know me a little bit better, I have a spreadsheet for almost everything. My ideal scenario would be that maybe later this year or early next year we can get into an accelerator program or something like that here in the US. My brother's always, he works with startups in China a lot, and so he's always saying, you should apply in Beijing. You would totally
go to Beijing.
Yeah, but I think that would mean I have to move there, and I don't think that would ever happen. No, but I would love to get an accelerator. I would love to have office space, even if it's just a desk somewhere, because I think as much as it's wonderful that I can see my son when he comes home for lunch, there's something to be said to have like actual separation.
It makes a big difference.
So I think that would be, but I don't right now. I don't want to spend the money on it, because I'm like, if I spend $400-500 in New York for just a desk, I'd rather spend that money on web dev or on marketing or on something else that actually gets the company. But that would be my dream, is to have get into an accelerator, get some workspace, and then get a more permanent team, because that's the other thing that's I really miss from my old days, is having that team that's there, and that you can just pop your hat in and just, hey, I have a quick question. Can I get your thoughts on this?
Share ideas. And
sharing ideas is really hard in a remote team.
Yeah. And you mentioned Pinterest. Is it a big thing for the marketing?
Yes. So Pinterest is for travel, it's a huge traffic.
You just did it for New York. All the time.
Yeah. So. And that was something that I didn't realize until I started doing research about user behavior, that people actually use it for trip planning. So, I think the path of a person planning a trip is they might go on Facebook and ask their friends about, I'm thinking about going somewhere.
Like I did and found you.
Well, or like even step back if they don't quite know yet where they're going. Yeah. So I'm thinking Spain or France, or I'm thinking Amsterdam versus London. Yeah. So they will ask their friends, they might get some input, and then once they know where they're going, they go on Pinterest, they post on Facebook again, and they do a lot of Google search. Yeah. So that's pretty much the biggest traffic driver for us is, obviously search, and then on Facebook referrals. So if our contributors, if they, for example, share an itinerary and tell their friends that they went somewhere, so that's great for us, because then their friends come to our site.
And maybe bookmark it and then come back when they actually search something.
Monetization is one of the most challenging questions for any startup. We ask Ranjana what her thoughts are on this going forward with Nugget.
So since travel is such a tricky market, there are different paths of monetizations that I'm looking into. So we've been approached by, so there's, short term, there's this affiliate fee kind of model where we could link to places, hotels, we could link to the strollers that people are talking about. I don't think that that's as long-term scalable.
And also probably too small to...
I mean, if you get this if your site is like huge, then that might be worth it. But so the ideas that we're right now exploring are definitely around those lines. But I think partnerships with, anything around content, partnerships is something that's really powerful. And we really want to stay away from pure advertising because it hurts the user experience. And here in the US, so many people are already starting to use ad blockers and, who knows where that whole market is going. But I don't think there's ever been, there's a lot of debate around, is like sponsored content bad? Is it good? There's so much sponsored content being pushed out. I think consumers they're aware of it, but if it's done well, I don't think they mind it. And so that's something that we're exploring now more and more, where we're starting to get approached by destinations or by brands in the space, where it could make sense, to give a hotel also an account on Nugget and have them create itineraries. So if you're staying at the Park Hyatt in Tokyo, well, here are 3-4 itineraries that...
Going for example, from the hotel in the nearby
Exactly. And so that's not
like
that's not salesy. It's actually offering value to our community, but it's also, offering value to the, the partner in this case, the Park Hyatt. So I think that's a huge opportunity that we see. But there's other, there's an e-commerce play potentially around, traveling with kids. There's a lot of different aspects, from gear that you might need or want. But there's a whole entertaining and education aspect to it that I'm personally really interested, just because of where I worked before, and it
plays into it.
And it's something that I don't have enough data on yet. It comes up every once in a while when people ask about, how do I keep my kid entertained for a 10-hour flight. But just having seen it with my own son when we just went to Mexico in March. And I was trying to find some books for him about Mexico, and he's 3. So I can't, when we went to China, the only book that I could really find was the Lonely Planet Kids Guide. That's geared toward kids that are 12, older. But he still looked at it, but it was a little awkward. So for Mexico, it's even worse because Lonely Planet doesn't do anything. That's for kids for Mexico. And Mexico is huge, right? So I just wanted something for the Yucatan. So I think they could potentially be upside there in developing products that actually tie into destinations and educate the kids based on their age about where they're going. And so that's something that...
And that opens up a huge field.
A huge field. You can go into any direction, whether that's books or mobile games, television. There's
a lot of things. Yeah.
And that goes completely away from this idea of, selling hotel rooms and deals. And something else we've been kicking around, some friends of mine who also work on different travel projects in the industries, is like tours, what if or events for families, what if we did just start a day in New York, like you guys, if you had kids and you came to New York and we're like, we do a day where you experience New York as a local family and you pay us,
that would be awesome.
some money for that. And then if that goes well, maybe then we organize a trip to Costa Rica or it's like, but it's understanding why do people go on these trips and why do people not go on these trips? Because I've never been a big fan of organized tours. So I really want to understand, what would be an experience that people would actually enjoy that is different from what's already offered. What I want to figure out, and I don't know this yet, is could we do something more along the lines of what the mom that I mentioned earlier did China, on that kind of where you can actually get people like that to travel and help them. Still, because it's less about, it's really about the experience. So, but it's a whole nother business on its own that requires a lot more research. So that's when I get excited about all the possibilities. But right now I have to focus on what we're building. Is that actually solving a problem that's worth solving? And are we solving it properly? And so for me, that's going to be the focus for the next 6 months is are we solving the problem that parents are having about the amount of time it takes to plan a trip, or should we do something different?
But it's exciting if you have different routes to think of. I mean,
it's exciting and it's paralyzing at the same time because you have so many options.
Yeah, I know.
And I think that's like the part where it's really important to have good advisors and people you can talk to regularly who are not in your day-to-day business, where you can just pick up the phone and be like, okay, I have 5 different directions that I could go. What should I actually be doing? And in most cases, I'm somebody who loves big picture and gets excited about crazy ideas. Sometimes it's helpful if somebody then tells you none of that matters right now. You need to talk to your consumers and find out if the itineraries, if they're actually meeting their expectations. Is it if somebody's planning a trip to Lisbon and you're sending them a Lisbon itinerary? Does that satisfy them? Or is this completely useless? And so that's kind of the moment as an entrepreneur where you're like, but I have these big ideas.
Sometimes you really need to solve the day-to-day things.
You need to focus on the problem first.
As our closing question, we asked Ranjana which startups inspired or still inspire her the most in her journey to build up Nugget.
There's so many of them out there. I mean, it's funny when I decided that I wanted to leave, I actually made a list of startups because somebody I've spoken to had said to me, like, well, if you want to work with startups, make a list. And, maybe if you don't have an idea yourself, you can always join somebody else. And I forgot somebody, like some famous VC investor also said something along the line. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he said, it's less about the passion, it's about your contribution. So what are you really good? So I love, and they're not really a startup anymore, but I love what Airbnb has done. So
they changed the industry.
They changed the industry. They're still changing it, and they're ever evolving. And I love their design. I love their user-centricness. So while they're obviously now a big corporation, I mean, people still call them a startup, but I mean, they're huge.
Are not.
They're not.
Yeah.
But to me, that's a company that I definitely, admire, and I look for, and I read, I read anything whenever I see something on Medium that comes up that talks about their early days, when they were trying to, figure out why were people not staying on the couches in New York that they were offering, and then they realized that photos were all crappy. And so then they went and actually photographed the places themselves and had beautiful photos. And that was an interesting takeaway because it was not scalable in any way.
But it was important.
But it was important to get it started. And so I think those are the kind of insights that I look at, and I'm like, okay, I don't need to worry about scaling right now. I need to figure out, can I solve it? And if I found the solution, then I'll figure out the scaling. So that's where the Airbnb example is great. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, a startup that I worked with in my old days that I love the founders and I really like the product. It's called Food 52. That's I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but and then the 2 founders, I mean, it started out of this idea of 52 recipes, and then it turned into a helpline, which that alone, I loved, the fact that they were able to activate all these passionate chefs, regular people that just love to cook and that were willing to go on a chat line. And if your Thanksgiving turkey is, still raw in the middle, you could text them and they would answer and tell you how to fix it. That was amazing. And I mean, over the years, they've now built a really successful site. They have a great e-commerce platform, an amazing team. So that, and Meryl and Amanda have been really helpful, generous with their advice to me too. So that's, at the early days, it was, understanding like even hiring questions. Like I think hiring people is one of the hardest things. And I remember Amanda sharing at an event that one of, the biggest mistakes she's ever made was hiring people, and that she knew really quickly weren't right, but then not letting them go quick enough. And so
Something
again,
we know.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think that's the hardest and the most painful thing is
to learn.
Because you spend so much time recruiting, and then you're excited that the person's there, and you're like, oh, it's not working. I don't want it. I don't want to start this process again. So I really like those guys. I mean, I would say, well, REI and Patagonia aren't really startups anymore, but Patagonia is another company that I really look up to, just because I like the fact that they never went public, that they really are still run
by the people.
And it's a private company, and that they have a mission in addition to their business. And, the naysayers might say, well, it's all marketing campaign, but I really, if you watch them, especially here in the US, how much lobbying they do for the environment, I think that's something else that I'm always in the back of my mind is like when we, what's the element of that we could, that applies to Nugget? Is it something, how could we down the road give back? I mean, right now there's no money exchange, but maybe there is a way down the road where we could, donate for itineraries or give back to the destinations that we feature, because there's this conundrum, especially with like more, like in Asia and South America, where people go to these remote destinations, they spend in these beautiful places, and then they take an Instagram photo that's the amazing lunch, but then most of the people in that country don't have enough food to eat, and so it's so that's, I mean, I know that didn't quite answer your question about startup, but I think Patagonia is a company where I'm always wondering, like, what will that be for us in 5 years or 10 years, where we can figure out how do we give back to whether that's children or the environment or
the
destinations itself.
Can be different routes. Probably it will figure it out itself in a way. There are so many more questions, but I think we already are way over the time for the podcast. And thank you so much for taking so much time and answering all the questions.
The kids are still outside, so it's quiet in here.
No, it's so interesting, and I think we can relate to many of the ideas and thoughts and questions you have, and thank you for all.
You're very welcome.
For your welcome sharing. Thank you.
All right, bye.